It was supposed to be a 5-minute stop. Just 5 minutes. That's all Daniel Harper planned to spend at the gas station on the edge of town. Long enough to fill the tank. Long enough to grab a bottle of water. Then back on the quiet highway toward home. But sometimes, the smallest stops become the moments that change everything. The station sat alone beneath flickering fluorescent lights, just outside the city limits. The night air was sharp and cold, carrying that strange silence that only comes after midnight. The pavement still glistened from earlier rain, reflecting the neon signs in blurred streaks of red and white. Daniel pulled his dark SUV beside pump number 6 and turned off the engine. In the back seat, his 8-year-old daughter Lily slept peacefully, her small hands wrapped tightly around her worn stuffed rabbit. A soft nightlight glow from the dashboard illuminated her face. She had insisted on staying awake to keep him company during the late grocery run, but exhaustion had won halfway home. Daniel looked at her through the rearview mirror and smiled. Everything he did for her. Since losing his wife 3 years ago, Daniel had learned how to become two people at once. He was both protector and comforter. The one who fixed scraped knees and braided hair. The one who checked for monsters under the bed even when he was the one carrying his own fears. He stepped out of the car, zipping up his jacket as the cold wind brushed against his face. The quiet felt heavier than usual. As he inserted his card into the gas pump, a sound broke through the silence. Laughter. Not the warm kind. The sharp, taunting kind. Daniel's eyes shifted toward the convenience store entrance about 30 feet away. That's when he saw her. A woman in her late 20s stood near the glass door, frozen in place. Her purse was clutched tightly against her chest, her shoulders tense. 3 young men surrounded her in a loose circle, blocking her path. One of them leaned too close. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with mock charm. "We're just talking." Another laughed. The woman tried to step sideways, but they adjusted with her. Trapping her without touching her. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. He didn't know her. He didn't owe her anything. But he knew that look. The look of someone calculating escape routes. The look of someone trying not to escalate a situation that was already spiraling. For a split second, Daniel hesitated. His eyes flickered back to his SUV. Lily was asleep. Safe. He could pump his gas. Mind his business. Drive away. Most people would. That's what the world teaches you, doesn't it? Stay out of it. Don't get involved. But then he imagined something else. He imagined Lily, 10 years from now, standing alone somewhere under cold lights, surrounded by strangers who thought intimidation was entertainment. And he knew. He couldn't stand there and pretend he didn't see it. The gas pump clicked as the tank filled, but Daniel barely noticed. He stepped away from the pump and walked toward the store. Each step steady. Calm. His heartbeat was loud in his ears, but his face remained composed. "Is there a problem here?" His voice cut through the tension like a blade. The 3 men turned simultaneously. One of them, taller than the others, looked Daniel up and down with open irritation. "Mind your business," he muttered. Daniel didn't raise his voice. Didn't puff his chest. Didn't try to look bigger than he was. He simply stepped closer. "It became my business," he said evenly, "when you started harassing her." The woman's eyes met his. Fear. Hope. A silent plea. The tallest man scoffed. "We're not doing anything." "Then you won't mind giving her space," Daniel replied. The air tightened. For a moment, it felt like the night itself was holding its breath. One of the men stepped forward slightly, testing boundaries. Daniel didn't flinch. He wasn't looking for a fight. But he wasn't backing down either. The standoff lasted only seconds, though it felt longer. Cars passed on the highway in the distance. The buzz of the station lights hummed overhead. Finally, the men exchanged glances. The leader clicked his tongue in annoyance. "Whatever," he muttered. "She's not worth it." They brushed past Daniel roughly as they headed toward their car, muttering insults under their breath. Tires screeched as they sped out of the parking lot. Silence returned. But it felt different now. The woman exhaled shakily, her knees almost giving out. Daniel instinctively reached out, not touching her, just close enough in case she needed balance. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her voice trembled. I think so." She swallowed hard. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." Daniel gave a small shrug. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fluorescent lights flickered again overhead. She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed by the tears. "Most people just watch," she admitted softly. Daniel glanced toward the convenience store window. Inside, a young clerk stood behind the counter, holding a phone slightly higher than normal. Recording. Daniel didn't notice. He was already turning back toward his SUV. "Get home safe," he said. She nodded again, clutching her purse, but this time with steadier hands. Daniel walked back to his car, the cool air clearing the adrenaline from his system. As he opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, Lily stirred slightly in the back. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily. "I'm here," he replied softly. She drifted back to sleep instantly. Daniel started the engine. The gas station grew smaller in his rearview mirror as he pulled onto the empty road. To him, it was over. Just a moment. Just a choice. Just doing what felt right. He didn't know that inside the convenience store, the clerk had already uploaded the video. He didn't know that strangers were watching, sharing, commenting. He didn't know that by sunrise, millions of people would know his face. To Daniel Harper, it had simply been 5 minutes. 5 minutes that proved something important. Courage doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wait for applause. It shows up quietly, when someone decides that staying silent isn't an option. And by morning, the world would decide that his quiet courage deserved to be heard. By the time the sun rose over the city, millions of people knew Daniel Harper's face. Daniel didn't. His morning began the same way it always did, quiet, steady, predictable. At 6:15 a.m., his alarm buzzed. He reached over, silenced it, and lay there for a moment staring at the ceiling. Another workday. Another school run. Another routine he had carefully built for himself and his daughter. For a few peaceful seconds, the world was still simple. He walked down the hallway and gently pushed open Lily's bedroom door. A soft pink nightlight glowed against the wall. She was curled up under her blanket, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin. Daniel smiled. Everything in his life revolved around protecting that little girl. He closed the door quietly and headed into the kitchen. Coffee brewed. Eggs sizzled in the pan. Toast popped up. The comforting rhythm of ordinary life. His phone sat on the counter. Buzzing. Then buzzing again. Daniel barely glanced at it. Probably emails. Maybe work notifications. Nothing urgent. Lily shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Daddy." "Morning, Bug." They talked about her spelling test. About whether she could bring cupcakes on Friday. About how she almost beat her best friend in a race at recess. Normal conversations. Safe conversations. Outside their small home, however, something very different was happening. Someone at the gas station had uploaded the security footage. Grainy video. Slightly tilted angle. Dramatic background music added by a stranger. The caption read, "Single dad steps in when no one else would." By 7 a.m., it had hundreds of thousands of views. By 8 o'clock, it had crossed 1 million. Comments poured in. "Real men still exist. This is how you raise a daughter. Respect." Daniel had no idea. He was too busy packing Lily's lunch. It wasn't until she grabbed her backpack and headed for the door that he finally picked up his phone. His screen lit up with notifications, more than he had ever seen. Missed calls from unknown numbers. Messages from co-workers. Texts from people he hadn't spoken to in years. His brow furrowed. What is going on? He opened the first message. "Bro, is this you?" Below it was a link. Daniel tapped it. The video loaded. He stared at himself on the screen, stepping away from the gas pump, walking toward the store, placing himself between the woman and the 3 men. From this angle, he looked different. Calm. Confident. Unshaken. He watched the men hesitate. Watched them back off. Watched himself walk back to his SUV as if nothing had happened. The comments scrolled rapidly beneath it. Someone give this man a medal. We need more people like him. This made me cry. Daniel swallowed. He hadn't done anything extraordinary. He had just acted. Daddy? Lily asked, noticing the change in his expression. He locked the phone quickly. Just work stuff. But his chest felt tight. At school drop-off, 2 parents glanced at him, whispering. One of them gave him a small nod of appreciation. Daniel nodded back politely, confused but beginning to connect the dots. By the time he reached his office building downtown, his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. The tall glass tower reflected the morning sunlight like always. Normally, walking through those doors felt routine. Today, it felt different. The lobby was quieter than usual. People weren't just looking at him. They were staring. 2 interns stood near the elevators, both glancing between their phones and his face. That's him, one whispered. Daniel pretended not to hear. Inside the elevator, a man from accounting gave him a firm nod. Good job, he muttered. Daniel forced a polite smile. When the elevator doors opened on his floor, his assistant Rachel stood quickly from her desk. Her expression wasn't excited. It was tense. Mr. Harper, she said carefully. The CEO would like to see you. Immediately. Daniel froze. The CEO? Rachel nodded once. No explanation. No reassurance. Just urgency. A knot tightened in his stomach. Victoria Langford did not call mid-level managers into her office without reason. Daniel straightened his jacket and walked toward the executive elevators. The ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. The executive level was silent, thick carpet, glass walls, controlled air. He approached the frosted doors and knocked. Come in, a composed voice responded. Victoria Langford sat behind her sleek glass desk, the city skyline stretching behind her in perfect symmetry. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply studied him. Mr. Harper, she said evenly. Have a seat. Daniel sat, trying to steady his breathing. She turned her monitor toward him. The video was paused at the exact moment he stood between the woman and the men. Would you like to explain? She asked. Her tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. Daniel cleared his throat. I saw something that didn't feel right, he said carefully. So I stepped in. Victoria held his gaze. You understand that when something goes viral, it reflects on the company. Yes, He braced himself for criticism. For a lecture about corporate image. But her next words shifted the atmosphere entirely. The woman in that video, she said quietly, is my younger sister. Daniel blinked. Silence filled the office. She didn't have security with her last night, Victoria continued. She wanted independence. She didn't tell me where she was stopping. Her jaw tightened slightly. If you hadn't intervened. She didn't finish the sentence. Daniel felt the weight of it anyway. I didn't know who she was, he said softly. I would have done the same for anyone. Victoria studied him carefully. You didn't escalate the situation, she observed. You didn't try to be a hero. You simply stood there. I didn't want a fight, Daniel replied. I just didn't want her to feel alone. Something changed in her expression, not softer, but more personal. My sister said you were calm, she said. That you looked like you weren't afraid. Daniel almost smiled. I was afraid, he admitted. But I have a daughter. If she's ever in trouble, I hope someone stands there for her. The room grew quiet. Outside, traffic moved far below, unaware of the shift happening inside. The board has seen the video, Victoria continued. Daniel's pulse quickened. They see leadership, she said. He looked up. They see integrity. And right now, that matters. Daniel sat in stunned silence. Less than 12 hours ago, he was under flickering gas station lights. Now he was being evaluated by the CEO herself. We're expanding into community outreach, Victoria said. Public safety initiatives. Social responsibility programs. Her eyes sharpened slightly. And you're being considered to lead it. The words hung in the air. Promotion. Responsibility. Visibility. Daniel thought of Lily. Of their small kitchen. Of pancake nights and homework at the table. I didn't do it for anything in return, he said carefully. Victoria gave a small nod. That's exactly why you're being considered. Daniel exhaled slowly. One moment. One decision. And everything had shifted. Take the afternoon, she said. Think about whether this is something you want. As he stood to leave, she added quietly. Mr. Harper, thank you. Not as a CEO. As a sister. Daniel nodded once and stepped out into the silent hallway. The elevator doors closed in front of him. By sunrise, the world had decided he was brave. But now he understood something deeper. Courage doesn't end when the moment passes. Sometimes. It opens a door you never expected to walk through. Fire. By the time Daniel stepped out of the executive elevator, the building felt different. Or maybe, he did. The quiet hum of the hallway seemed louder. The polished floors, shinier. Every passing glance carried new meaning. He had walked into the office that morning as a mid-level operations manager. He was walking out as something else. Not promoted. Not yet. But noticed. And being noticed came with weight. Daniel loosened his tie as he returned to his desk. His phone buzzed again, news outlets requesting interviews. Community groups asking for statements. Strangers sending long messages about how his actions had restored their faith in humanity. He stared at the screen for a long moment. He hadn't meant to inspire anyone. He had just refused to ignore what was in front of him. Rachel appeared quietly at the edge of his desk. Everything okay? Daniel nodded slowly. I think so. But the truth was more complicated. Victoria's words echoed in his mind. The board sees leadership. Leadership. That word carried responsibility. And responsibility meant change. He opened his laptop, trying to focus on emails, but his thoughts drifted back to the gas station. The flickering lights. The tension in the air. The way the woman's eyes had silently begged for anyone, to step in. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't calculated risks or outcomes. He had simply acted. And now that action was reshaping his future. Around noon, his phone rang again. Unknown number. Daniel hesitated, then answered. Mr. Harper. The voice was calm. Female. Yes. This is Emily. He paused. Victoria's sister. I just wanted to thank you, she continued gently. In person, if possible. Daniel leaned back in his chair. You don't owe me anything, he said. I know, she replied. But I need to. There was something in her tone, not dramatic, not fragile, just honest. They agreed to meet that evening at a quiet restaurant downtown. When the call ended, Daniel sat still for several seconds. This wasn't just about a viral video anymore. This was about real people. Real consequences. At 3 p.m., Victoria sent a short email. We'll speak tomorrow. Consider the proposal carefully. No pressure. But plenty of implication. When Daniel finally left the office, the sky was turning gold with sunset. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, traffic, voices, distant sirens. But he felt slightly outside of it all. As if he were watching his life from a distance. At home, Lily ran to the door the moment he stepped inside. Daddy. My teacher said you're famous. Daniel blinked. What? She held up a tablet. There it was again, the video. This time with bright captions and emotional music. Her teacher had shown the class during morning circle. They said you're brave, Lily said proudly. Daniel crouched down to her level. Being brave, he said softly, just means doing what's right. Even when it's uncomfortable. She smiled. I want to be brave like you. His chest tightened. That was the part that mattered. Not headlines. Not promotions. Ha! Later that evening, Daniel arrived at the restaurant where he was meeting Emily. It wasn't overly luxurious, just quiet and refined. Emily stood as he approached. Without the fear from the gas station, she looked different. Stronger. Composed. Thank you for coming, she said sincerely. They sat across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. I've replayed that night in my head 100 times, she admitted. I kept thinking, what if no one stepped in? Daniel nodded. But someone did. She gave a small smile. Yes. You did. There was no exaggeration in her voice. No dramatics. Just gratitude. My sister tends to control everything, Emily continued. Security. Schedules. Protection. Daniel smiled faintly. Sounds familiar. They both understood. Last night reminded her, and me, that sometimes protection comes from strangers, Emily said quietly. Daniel leaned back. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I know, she replied. That's what makes it powerful. Their conversation drifted from the incident to family. To responsibility. To the strange reality of going viral overnight. When dinner ended, Victoria herself appeared. She moved with calm authority, but her expression was different than it had been in the office. Less corporate. More human. I won't take much of your time, she said to Daniel. But I wanted to be clear about something. He waited. This opportunity isn't charity, she continued. You demonstrated judgment under pressure. Calm leadership. Controlled escalation. Those qualities are rare. Daniel absorbed her words carefully. The Outreach Division will focus on intervention education, she said. Teaching people how to step in safely. How to de-escalate. How to protect without violence. He pictured the gas station again. The thin line between conflict and control. You wouldn't just be a figurehead, Victoria added. You'd build it. Silence settled over the table. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was infrastructure. Impact. Daniel thought of Lily watching that video in her classroom. Thought of the comments from strangers saying they wished someone had stepped in for them once. He felt something shift inside him. Maybe that night wasn't random. Maybe it was preparation. What would it mean for my current role? He asked carefully. A transition, Victoria replied. Higher responsibility. Higher visibility. Higher pressure. Daniel understood what wasn't being said. His life would become less private. Less quiet. He looked between the two sisters. Then down at his hands. He had always told Lily that doing the right thing mattered even when no one was watching. But now everyone was watching. The question wasn't whether he could handle the spotlight. It was whether he could use it for something bigger than himself. Finally, he looked up. If I do this, he said slowly, it won't be for headlines. Victoria nodded. Understood. It'll be for the next person standing at a gas station, unsure whether to step in. Emily smiled softly. That's exactly why you're the right choice. As Daniel stepped outside into the cool night air, the city lights shimmered around him. 24 hours ago, he had been just another man filling his gas tank. Now, he stood at the edge of something larger than himself. Fame had found him unexpectedly. But purpose. Purpose was something he could choose. And for the first time since the video went viral, Daniel felt clarity settle in his chest. Being seen wasn't the burden. Wasting the moment would be. And tomorrow, he would give Victoria his answer. The next morning didn't feel ordinary. It felt decisive. Daniel stood in his kitchen, staring at his coffee as steam rose into the early light. The house was quiet. Lily was still asleep. Today, he would give Victoria his answer. And somehow, it felt heavier than the night at the gas station. Because stepping between three men and a frightened woman had required instinct. This required commitment. He walked into Lily's room and gently brushed her hair from her face. She stirred. Are you famous forever now? She mumbled sleepily. Daniel smiled faintly. No, bug. Just for a little while. She opened one eye. Are you going to help more people? The question hit deeper than she realized. I'm thinking about it, he said softly. She nodded, satisfied, and drifted back to sleep. That was the moment he knew. It wasn't about publicity. It wasn't about corporate advancement. It was about the example he set not just for Lily, but for anyone watching. By the time he reached the office, Reporters had gathered outside the building. Cameras. Microphones. Questions shouted into the morning air. Daniel, why did you step in? Do you think more men should act like you? Are you accepting the promotion? Security escorted him through a side entrance. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Employees weren't whispering anymore, they were openly watching. Some with admiration. Some with curiosity. Some with skepticism. Because when someone rises quickly, people start asking whether they deserve it. Rachel approached his desk. The board meeting has been moved up, she said quietly. They want you present. Daniel blinked. The board? She nodded. This wasn't just a job offer anymore. This was scrutiny. In the executive conference room, the long polished table reflected the morning light. 12 board members sat around it, seasoned executives, investors, strategists. Victoria stood at the head. Mr. Harper, she said evenly. Thank you for joining us. Daniel took a seat, aware of every eye on him. A large screen displayed the viral video. 4 million views now. Public response has been overwhelmingly positive, one board member said. However, virality fades. Substance remains. Another leaned forward. Why should we entrust you with a national outreach initiative? The room felt tight. Daniel took a slow breath. Because I didn't step in to go viral, he said calmly. I stepped in because it was necessary. Silence. He continued. The problem isn't that people don't care. It's that they don't know how to act safely. They're afraid of escalation. Afraid of consequences. Several members exchanged glances. What we build, Daniel said, should focus on education. De-escalation training. Clear guidelines. Real-world simulations. If people know how to intervene without violence, they will. Victoria watched him carefully. And if the attention fades, one member asked. It will, Daniel replied honestly. But the training won't. The impact won't. A pause. Then another question. You understand this role will put your life under a microscope? Daniel thought of Lily. Of pancake nights. Of privacy. Yes, he said quietly. But I also understand what happens when people look away. The room grew still. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Victoria broke the silence. I believe Mr. Harper represents the culture we claim to value. One by one, hands slowly rose around the table. Not unanimous, but decisive. The vote passed. Just like that, Daniel's life shifted again. When the meeting ended, Victoria approached him privately. This won't be easy, she said. I know. You'll face criticism, doubt, expectations. Daniel nodded. I faced worse under fluorescent lights. For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. That afternoon, a press conference was scheduled. The company moved quickly. Banners were printed. A name was announced. The Stand Together initiative. Daniel stood backstage, adjusting his tie. The murmur of reporters filled the auditorium beyond the curtain. Emily approached him. You don't have to be perfect, she said gently. Just be honest. He nodded. When his name was announced, he stepped into the light. Cameras flashed instantly. The brightness was overwhelming at first. He moved to the podium, gripping its edges lightly. For a split second, doubt flickered through him. What if this was too much? What if he failed? Then he pictured Lily watching from home. He leaned toward the microphone. I'm not here because I'm a hero, he began. The room quieted. I'm here because I made a choice that anyone can make. He told them about fear. About hesitation. About the moment before action. He spoke about responsibility not as strength, but as awareness. We don't need more viral moments, he said. We need more prepared moments. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras zoomed in. Our initiative will focus on education, he continued. Teaching safe intervention. Encouraging accountability. Creating a culture where stepping forward is supported, not feared. Applause began softly, then grew louder. When he stepped away from the podium, something inside him felt settled. Not pride. Not relief. Purpose. Outside the building, as evening settled over the city, Daniel finally returned home. Lily ran to him the moment he walked in. "I saw you on TV," she shouted. He laughed softly and knelt down. "What did you think?" "You looked nervous," she said honestly. "I was." She wrapped her arms around his neck. "But you did it anyway." Daniel held her tightly. Yes. He had. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel stood alone at the kitchen window. The world outside looked the same. Streetlights glowing. Cars passing. Neighbors unaware of the shift that had taken place in his life. But he knew. The gas station had been a moment. This was a mission. And missions require sacrifice. Privacy. Comfort. Normalcy. But as he turned off the kitchen light and walked toward Lily's room to check on her one more time, he felt no regret. Because sometimes, stepping forward once means committing to step forward again. And this time, he wasn't standing alone anymore. 3 months later, the gas station was quiet again. The same flickering fluorescent lights. The same hum of traffic in the distance. But this time, Daniel Harper wasn't there by accident. He stood beside pump number 6, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the exact spot where everything had changed. The night air felt colder than he remembered. Or maybe he just understood it differently now. 3 months. That's all it took for a single moment to become a movement. The Stand Together initiative had launched nationwide. Community centers were hosting workshops. High schools were inviting instructors to teach de-escalation training. Videos explaining safe intervention techniques had reached millions. Not because of outrage, but because of example. Daniel wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't chasing cameras. But the world had decided that his quiet courage meant something. And now he had to live up to it. A car door shut behind him. He turned. Lily stepped out, holding her familiar stuffed rabbit, though she insisted she only kept it for memories now. "You're thinking again," she said, walking toward him. Daniel smiled. "Maybe." She looked around the empty station. "This is where it happened." He nodded. She stood beside him in silence for a moment. "Were you scared?" she asked. Daniel considered the question carefully. "Yes," he answered honestly. "But being scared doesn't mean you don't move. It just means you move anyway." She seemed to process that. Across the street, a small community group had gathered near the store entrance. Cameras were set up, but not national news this time. Local press. Local families. Tonight marked the official opening of the program's first permanent training center, built just blocks from where the incident happened. Victoria had insisted on that location. Change should start where it's needed most, she'd said. Daniel and Lily crossed the parking lot together. Emily greeted them first. "You ready?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded. But his heart felt heavier than it had during the board meeting. He wasn't nervous about speaking. He was aware of responsibility. Because what started as instinct was now influence. Inside the newly renovated center, rows of chairs were filled with families, students, and small business owners. People who wanted to learn how to step in safely. People who didn't want to freeze when something felt wrong. Victoria stood at the podium briefly, explaining the mission. Then she stepped aside. "Tonight," she said, "is about a simple decision. One that any of us can make." She looked toward Daniel. And the man who proved it. Applause filled the room as Daniel walked to the front. He paused for a moment, letting the sound settle. 3 months ago, he had stood under fluorescent lights with uncertainty in his chest. Now he stood under warm lights, facing people who believed in something bigger than fear. He leaned toward the microphone. "I've been called brave," he began. The room quieted instantly. "But the truth is, I hesitated." A few surprised expressions appeared. "I looked at my car. I thought about driving away. I thought about my daughter sleeping in the back seat." He swallowed gently. Courage isn't about never feeling fear. It's about deciding that someone else's safety matters more than your comfort. Silence deepened. He explained the program, how it focused on awareness, verbal intervention, distraction techniques, and safe reporting. How to step forward without escalating. How to support without violence. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't dramatize. He simply told the truth. We can't rely on viral moments, he continued. We have to rely on each other. Heads nodded throughout the room. In that parking lot, I wasn't thinking about being filmed. I was thinking about what kind of world I want my daughter to grow up in. He glanced toward Lily in the front row. She sat taller in her seat. And that world, he said softly, depends on ordinary people choosing not to look away. The applause this time wasn't loud at first. It was steady, growing, authentic. After the speech, families lined up to ask questions. Teenagers signed up for training sessions. Local store owners volunteered to host awareness posters. Momentum. Real momentum. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin, Daniel stepped outside for air. The night sky stretched above him, darker now, quieter. Emily joined him. You changed more than you realize, she said. Daniel shook his head gently. I didn't change anything alone. That's the point, she replied. Across the parking lot, Lily stood near the original spot where the confrontation happened. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She was watching a group demonstration on safe bystander intervention. Learning. Growing. Daniel walked toward her. Daddy, she said, if I ever see something wrong, I'll know what to do. He knelt beside her. That's all I ever wanted. She wrapped her arms around him. In that embrace, everything became clear. The viral views. The boardroom vote. The headlines. None of it mattered as much as this. One child understanding that silence isn't safety. As they walked back toward their car, Daniel glanced once more at the gas station lights. 3 months ago, it had been a random stop. 5 minutes. Now it was a reminder. That change doesn't begin with power. It begins with presence. With standing still when it would be easier to leave. As Daniel opened the car door for Lily, she looked up at him and said something that would stay with him forever. You didn't just help that lady, she said. You helped everyone who watched. Daniel closed the door gently. Maybe that was true. Because somewhere, at another gas station, on another quiet night, someone would feel that same hesitation. And maybe, just maybe, they would remember a man who stepped forward under flickering lights. Not because he was fearless, but because he refused to look away. And that's how movements begin. Not with noise, not with fame, but with one ordinary person choosing to stand between fear and someone who needs protection. And this time, the world was watching. Fire the end fire.